the chateau into which my maid had ventured to make forcible entrance rather than to permit me in my desperately wounded condition to spend a night in the open air was one of those piles of commingled gloom and grandeur which for so long have frowned upon the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Radcliffe. To all appearance, it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform memorial trophies, together with an unusually large number of very spirited modern paintings. It was in these paintings, which depended from the walls not only on their main surfaces, but in the very many nooks the bizarre architecture of the chateau rendered necessary. It was in these paintings, my incipient delirium perhaps, had caused me to take great interest, so that I bade Petra to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of the tall candelabrum which stood at the head of the bed, and to throw open far and wide the heavy black fringed velvet curtains which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done so that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, then at least to the contemplation of these paintings and to the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, which purported to criticize and describe them. Long, long I read. Devotedly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my arm with great difficulty rather than disturb my slumbering maid, I positioned it so that its rays might fall more fully upon the book. But this action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. For the rays of the numerous candles, and there were many, now fell within a niche which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I now saw in vivid light a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just ripening into womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly and then shut my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent even to my own perception, but while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over in my mind my reasons for so shutting them. It was an impulsive movement to gain time for thought, to make sure my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for a more sober and certain gaze. In a very few moments, I again looked fixedly at the painting. That I now saw aright, I would not and could not doubt. For the first flashing of the candles upon the canvas, it seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses and to startle me at once into waking life. The painting, I have already said, was that of a young girl, a mere head and shoulders done in what is technically termed the vignette manner, very much in the style of the favorite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, even the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly filigreed and moresque. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself, but it could have been neither the execution of the work or the immortal beauty of the countenance which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. Could it have been that my senses, so startled, had mistaken the head for that of a living person? Oh, well, that I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design of the vignetting, even of the frame, had once dispelled such an idea. Thinking earnestly on these points, I remained for an hour, perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted on the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back in the bed. I had found that the spell of the picture was in an absolute life-likeness of expression which at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. A deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum to its former position. The cause of my agitation being thus shut from view, I eagerly sought the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. I turned to the number which designated the oval portrait, and there I read this vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she first saw and loved and wedded the painter. He was passionate, studious, austere, already having a bride in his art. She, a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee, all light and smiles, frolicsome as a young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and the brushes and the other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear of the painter's desire to portray even his young bride, but she was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many, many weeks in the dark turret chamber where the light dripped on the pale canvas only from overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour and day to day. And he was a passionate and wild and a moody man who became lost in reveries, and he would not see that the light which fell so ghastily in the lone turret withered the health and spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on and on, uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, who had great renown, took a fervid and burning pleasure in his work, in his task. He wrought day and night to depict her who so loved him, and yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth, some who beheld the painting spoke of its resemblance in low words, as of a mighty marvel, and as a proof no less of the power of the painter than of his deep love for her, whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labor grew nearer its conclusion, there were admitted none into the turret, for the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and he turned from his eyes from the canvas rarely, even to regard the countenance of his wife, and he would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her who sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and little remained to do save but one brush upon the mouth, one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as the flame within the socket of the candle. But then the brush was given, and the tint was placed. And for one moment the painter stood before his work, entranced with the work that he had wrought. But in the next he grew tremulous and very pallid and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, "This is indeed life itself!" He suddenly turned to regard his beloved. She was dead.